This installment is on email and specifically around what we know is a clutter inbox slows down our collaboration. Today we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. On the GoToMeeting panel, you are able to enter in questions. Please send them in. We will answer them live if we can, and if not, we always have a blog that we're able to answer the questions, or we'll contact you directly. Also, if you're a fan of Twitter, we do have a hashtag that you can see on the top left, Collab4Biz, that people will be looking at during the session and afterwards. So let's make this as interactive as possible, and also throughout the session we'll have a few different polls. So why are we here today? Well, we know that email isn't stopping as a major form of communication. At the last estimate, a company called the Redicati Group estimates that there are about 2 billion email addresses in the world. Yes, some of us have 3 to 5, but that's almost 20% of the world's population. So as a result, it's easy for corporations to see email as a widespread and default form of communication and interaction. However, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most efficient way for your organization to communicate or to increase productivity. So we're going to take a look, like all of the webinar series, at how email fits into the collaboration spectrum, the overview of the feature itself, what is the competition. We're going to walk away with some key considerations for applying this feature, email, in your organization, and then have some takeaways that you can apply instantaneously in your work. All right, so who are we today? Well, I am Adam Levitan. I am a senior consultant at Portal Solutions. I have been working with SharePoint and other collaboration features for over 8 years now. I focus on the interaction between collaboration systems and the people who support them. And I do blogs on Portal Solutions, also on AIM, and I'm a guest blogger on ViewDo Labs. Please feel free to email direct me, reach out to me on Twitter. Along with me today, I have Steve. Steve, who are you?
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me here. So I'm Director of Consulting Services here at Portal Solutions. I've been here for about 5 years and managed implementations from upwards of $1 million to the $35,000 or $20,000 SharePoint implementation and Internet in the Box. And it's been a great pleasure working with the SharePoint platform for probably at least 10 years before I think it was even called SharePoint. And before that, I was working as IT manager at a manufacturing firm, so I had kind of the opportunity to be that Exchange admin, the SharePoint admin, and just kind of worked up the Microsoft stack and gained all those different experiences.
So I'm going to pick Steve's brain a lot today about those experiences too, and what he sees with our clients moving forward about the different opportunities with email and different collaboration systems. So, okay. So if you're on a former webinar that we did on instant messaging, please forgive me. This is a repeat. And if not, stay tuned. The whole point of this series is the recognition that social is a small piece of collaboration as a whole. And in this example, so is email as a small piece of collaboration as a whole. And how we're going to judge where those different features of collaboration in the social enterprise fit in is 2 different ways. First, we're going to take a look at the audience. And we're going to determine if the audience is really your organization, Where does email fit in with those other features? And try to provide some tools to determine how email will be utilized optimally within your organization. So here's what the scale looks like. And I would be remiss, especially for email, not to cover how we think email is used today. And so how we think it's used today is, well, this. That look familiar? It's ubiquitous, not only in our business lives, but our daily lives. We're attached to email, and we're pretty much using it for everything. Oh, we need to know what my account number is for the bank? Must be stored in email. Need to know where my offer letter is for my job? Must be stored in email. Need to ask my friend a question of where we're going out tonight? Must be in email. Everything across your personal and corporate lives are stored in email. I would say that this is not optimal. Another really interesting thing about email that Steve and I were talking about is that it's very personal, and different people use it in different ways, and that it would be interesting to start having email classes and teach people how to use email, because the expectations might be what are getting us in trouble, that different people approach this communication channel in different ways, and we get mixed signals. How we think email should be applied, especially among the collaboration features that are available today, is to support temporary content and aimed at individual or teamed audiences. So instead of that big red blob that we saw before, we move this up and to the left. It's really focusing on you want to communicate a specific piece of information to an individual. Now, some of you might be scratching your head and saying, well, what about those enterprise-wide email blasts? Yes, I can't argue against email being a good place for notifying people that they need to look somewhere. But notice that a key is that even when you send that email blast out, you're actually guiding someone to another source of information. So again, sometimes an email is something that does need to be recorded, like a decision. Maybe it's a throwaway, again, like asking, well, when are you coming to the conference room? That might be better off put into an instant message. But, if we can change the habits of organizations to use email for short questions, these key decisions, we can actually improve productivity across and reduce your inbox so it's not so cluttered. Just for reference, let's take a look at the other technologies across the collaboration spectrum. And, we discussed how instant messaging is really temporary individual. We're seeing here how email is more for a broader base of people, but still not quite that record that we might be using it today. We talked about how individuals approach email in different ways. And in the upcoming weeks, we'll look at the other different items on this scale, social / microblogs and news feeds with Naomi Moneypenny, team sites, and extranets with Benjamin Neuland, intranets with Bobby Chang from here, and document and record management with Nick Inglis. Sorry, Nick. And we'll talk about how they fit and how they can be optimized. So I think it's important here because the collaboration spectrum has changed so quickly over the last years, and it's not necessarily optimal to do work the same way we've been doing it before. So I guess here, Steve, I want to ask you a question. How have you seen this spectrum being applied with our clients?
I think that a lot of our clients are starting to try to, and probably about 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, they were trying to pull stuff out of email and put it into team sites and extranets. I want to share this document that I'm collaborating on with a team member, and I I don't want to keep track of which version is the right version. So we saw a lot of clients moving to try to pull those type of records and put them into team sites and extranets. I'd say in the last year or two, we've seen a big influx of desire to use Yammer and just general business news feeds because they're trying to pull what used to be the email announcement, the company CEO would send out his monthly blog, monthly blast that says this is how the company's doing, new people are joining the company. And we're now starting to see that they'd like to move those to be, instead of once a month, they'd like to be, pretty up to date. Somebody just started, I want to make that announcement today. We're actually starting to see them wanting to post that information in news feeds and in social, which is also changing the fact that instead of a really long email that someone sent, now we're 140 characters marked off by a hashtag new person or something like that. So it's very, we've seen a lot of differences and changes over the last 4 or 5 years.
That actually brings up a really interesting point for me, because you put it into perspective how some of these tools have come and expanded where email has not. So those updates, those personnel updates, right, they're in a database somewhere, and then someone else was recording them in Word somewhere and then putting them in Excel, and that's moved to other collaboration systems, and that's a very common thing that we see. Hey, why are we doing this in 3 different places and being updated? So it brought the message to me, too, of why don't we apply that logic to email, especially because it's being used so much for so many different things. Absolutely. So now I want to take a little look about the background of email. And this is interesting because, the timeline of email, we think of it as a modern tool, most of us, because we were exposed to it in the late 90s with the World Wide Web. We know there are people who say they created the internet and it has been around since the late 60s, early 70s. And part of that was ARPANET. And ARPANET was designed loosely to communicate from one side of the country to the next and really around the world. And so it was point-to-point email, and really it was a console of huge mainframes for mainly the military to be able to communicate with each other. So that's in the 70s. This is not a new technology. However, it has rapidly changed over the last 20 years. The next item I like to do, it's nicely spaced around, and I love the image of this terminal. I dare not call it a computer, is IBM. IBM pioneered BitNet, which was the communication for different universities. There was SUNY in New York City and Yale in Connecticut that communicated to each other. And I thought it was really interesting. So the requirements for this were you needed a data circuit, a phone line, remember those, with a modem, 56K, and that was probably really fast way back then. It was probably like 4K. And then you needed to not charge anyone else to use it. So those are the limitations. Have a phone line, be able to connect into the network, and then you can use these terminals to communicate across universities. So I think that's really interesting how basic it was. And then approximately 1993, we can bring up the infamous, and in the DC area, America Online is not that far away, and Steve Case is still a major player in the technology around here. But we get AOL, and now this is visual internet for the masses. So you're not necessarily using terminals anymore. You don't need to know any specific Unix codes and languages and have access anywhere. Now it's easy. Oh, look, I send to, from, put a subject, and enter a content, and you could even make it pretty. I remember all those smiley faces and things we were so excited to use over the internet. I know, Steve, we were talking about our similar experiences. Why don't we go into detail about that a little bit here?
Yeah, I mean, back in early 90s and, going back to school, we didn't have devices in our pockets that we could look at email or things like that. We had to go to the computer lab, open up the specific email application, and then pretty much I could email other professors at my university or I could email other students, but my family didn't have email addresses. I didn't have, I wasn't able to use it as a ubiquitous communication tool back at that time. It was pretty much just for school.
Yeah, I think it is interesting how much we take it for granted. You sent me to a flashback. There was one person that we knew by his email address. We forgot what his first name is, and we called him last name, first initial, because he was just always on email and in his dark corner. Yes, he was a computer science major. You also bring up a really interesting point about the 90s. First you could access email via a client product, and that's, Outlook, Lotus Notes, Novell, right on your desktop. It's an application on your computer. But then the major way that the World Wide Web brought to us was through the web. Now, Steve did mention that he loved Eudora and Eudora Pro, and I think they're still around, and I remember using it on my Mac way back in the 90s. But now we think of, OWA, Outlook.com, Google, and what have you. And then, of course, later on, we have the smartphone, the app, the mobile. Obviously, this is beyond just phones now. But in the beginning, it was the ability to check email on your phone device before tablets and actually even laptops really existed. I think in this slide, it's really important to point out that when using email, there is a central server. And I think this gets skipped over. Even if you're using web and you're using Google and you don't think about it's point-to-point, I email Steve and Steve receives it. Well, there's an engine behind that, and that engine is a server. And especially, too, when you're talking about the client or app, you have Outlook. Outlook is actually connected to a server called Exchange. Novell, it was connected to the Novell servers. So there is this server that does all have the rules and regulations and policies and procedures, and is storing your information somewhere, especially, too, with apps. If you think about how BlackBerry works, BlackBerry requires its own servers. So it's really an interesting model that you can't skip. It's not really from one individual to the next. And then, of course, the newest fad, well, those servers can be in the cloud. What does the cloud mean? It means you're not owning that server anymore, and you're giving some of the responsibilities to manage those features to other people. So we're going to talk about that a little later. But I think this is really important to think about when you're talking about email. It is not just I type this in and it goes to someone else. All right, so now we're going to do our first poll here. And we're going to say, what do you use to most frequently, oh, I have to launch it. There we go. What do you use most frequently to check your email? I can see the numbers going, 50% of you. I'll wait about 10 more seconds. All right, great. So what I have here is 58% of you guys use clients, and 58%, how does that add up? I'm not really quite sure how that adds up, but what I have is 58% of the people use the client to access their email, 58% use app, phone, mobile to access email. That's really quite entertaining. And then a remainder of 16%. So the math here seems to be a little fishy, but that's okay. Why we ask that, and that's pretty standard. And I found this really interesting diagram from Litmus that shows from 2012 to 2013 the growth of the different methods of accessing content. So here you can see the top one is mobile, and in that year there has been a 24% increase, and in that same year the client, there's been a 36% reduction. So actually now looking back at our numbers, it looks like we're a little bit different than the masses, where a lot of people, 50%, said they're accessing email via the client. And I think this is very telling for how we're using email, maybe the brevity that we need to communicate in emails instead of making them long and having people miss what is in the actual content. What are your thoughts, Steve?
Well, I think back to when I was an IT manager, and you had your client desktop, and that was kind of standard. You had that. Everybody had their desktop. Everybody had their Outlook 1997 version, and that was the way it was. And then we started to implement webmail, and that was a big feature because all of a sudden you could get your emails at home, and if you had a laptop from the company or if you had a personal computer, you could log in, check your email. But I think most people were only checking in if they had that really large client engagement that they were working on and trying to close a deal or something specific where they need to be able to check it. And I think now that the mobile devices have kind of evolved, it's become
poll that says, what's your expectation in the future of accessing email, especially as we're talking about the collaboration spectrum and how different people want to use different things, and mobile is one of them. A lot of the different features can be accessed on your tablet and phone, and so if they live there, they don't want to have to go back to your computer to be able to do these different functionalities.
I think we're definitely seeing like a lot of talk about mobile first, and then looking at everything else as being almost secondary versus the other way around.
That's true. It's another trend, and I think though it's a trend that's not going to die. and my messaging today is hopefully consistent. Is that we've adapted how we approach these other features. We need to take a look at email and how we can adapt using that. So an interesting survey that I found by the Harvard Business Journal that really did look at email and how it fit in with other forms of collaboration. And this graphic is showing about people who, how they rated collaboration tools as most effective. And we could probably get into analyzing the wording and what have you, but I like to look at this just with a broad swath, and it actually looks fairly consistent with what we've been talking about before, in the sense that a vast majority of people are confident that email is successful at being communication for individuals. It's successful as being communication for lists. My wife works at a government facility in the area, and they still have listservs, which I always kind of chuckle at, but they still use them. They do go out to 40,000 people, and half of those probably get deleted. I'd love to see the metrics. It's really interesting, though. Only 25% of people use it for teams, and I think that might show that people are not confident that everyone in that team will read the email the same way, will read it at all, and that the message will be utilized in an effective manner. And I think one thing about teams that I always think about, and I've had success in my collaboration implementations, is moving tasks where they need to be, into a collaboration team site environment where individual tasks, maybe they still send out alerts, but you can track them and be able to see exactly where your team members are at any given time and not rely on email for those updates and those responsibilities to be given out and, I guess, returned, in essence. Also, the interesting thing here, too, is there's a real low confidence in other spectrum features, instant messaging, business collaboration, microblogs. They come very slow in the back, and less than 10% of the people say they're confident in using them. And I hope that the social webinar series is a start of how these features could be applied better so that people can gain confidence. Any other thoughts, Steve, on?
Well, I think it goes back to your earlier comment that you grow up having an email address. You know how to use it before you join the workforce, before you go to school. You're using email, whereas some of the collaboration tools such as Link or Exchange, SharePoint, you may not have had any experience with that, so you don't necessarily trust that everybody you send your on your team is going to know how to use that specific tool without some sort of training. Whereas email, I think you're expecting that everyone who gets that email is going to be ready to use it.
Exactly, and that the interesting thing though is my 14-year-old actually is using news feeds and microblogs in school. It is a piece of communication between herself and a few teachers. Now, not all teachers are using it, so it's changing what people 5 years older aren't using that, and now she's learning and experiencing that. So it does bring up how the workforce will be developed in a very short period of time and their expectations of the tools that are in front of them. So just want to remind everybody, I see someone asked how to keep the chat window open, and I think you just press the plus button there, and that should keep that open. But please, if anyone else has a question about the content that we're talking about right now, please share it and send it, and we'll respond live. Let's continue a little bit with the overview. Oh, the other way. So actually, another thing here that is interesting is, actually, you know what? I wanted to do the next poll. Let's do the next poll. How much time do you spend on email? Up to 20% of their day looking at email or reading, searching, all those different activities, and another 50% of the attendees spend between 21 and 40% of their time of their day. So I think that's really interesting, and this slide, if you had peeked at it, shows exactly that. So of the Harvard Business people who were interviewed, they said 50% of their day is doing other things, and then obviously 50% is doing email. And of the 50%, 25 is all those other things: archiving, searching, managing email. Which folder do I put it in? Why do I put it in there? Do I add it as a content? Do I mark it in a certain way? Do I use a color code, or do I add a task? And then responding to email and writing emails are the other percentages. So we're along the line. So email is a huge, important part, and I think that's the interesting thing and the hard thing about breaking the habit, is that it is right in front of us. There is a lot of work that gets done in there. How will your work be affected by moving from email into some of these different areas of the spectrum? So now let's talk a little bit about competition, and we've mentioned this, but I just want to put everything into perspective. So, the original email was public on AOL and other Eudora, access through Eudora. You could do commercial, but it really exploded in organizations. And a lot of the time it was built around what network infrastructure did you have. I mean, Novell, huge product in the 90s into the 2000s because of their amazing infrastructure until Microsoft Active Directory came into being. And they had a lot of network products. Another product, Lotus Notes, I could joke and say, if you're using Lotus 123, but they had productivity software. So if you were using the Lotus productivity software, why not use that for email too? And then, of course, comes around the other productivity software we might be familiar with, which is Microsoft. And so Microsoft, brought in Outlook and Exchange afterwards and slowly added features to compete in the market. But, then we have the other. These were all network, customer-based, client-based systems. Now we have the latest entry, which is Google, right? So it dominated the personal email space and then said, hey, why don't we do this for business? And it's come in and said, those of you who like less expensive cloud access to your email and another set of collaboration functionality, please come and look at what we're doing. And there's, government-enabled cloud from Google. A lot of schools and municipalities are taking a look. So the competition is not just what is your best client tool, but what are the different features that are available in email itself. Speaking about features, the other interesting thing about email now is really how it competes against the other items within the collaboration spectrum. So those short questions, are you in the conference room, really have gone into the IM world. Then we also have those deep philosophical inquiries that have moved into the social news feed. And finally, of course, too, we have just plain old, hey, texting, right? Hey, let's do it all directly one-to-one on your mobile device. In this case, probably phone is the best. While we were talking about this, though, Steve was mentioning the decision-making process of what tool to use when, and I think I want you to share that.
Yeah, we're working on a couple of large projects right now, and I actually have one of our developers is out in the Seattle area. So I'm often trying to communicate with him, and it depends on what I need and how fast I need it, and where is he available, or is he available. So typically I look to see, instant messaging. I'll open up Link and say, hey, is he online and at his computer right now? So I kind of use it as a presence awareness tool, If it's a quick item and I just, hey, can you send me the link to the, the login screen that you're using for this development session? I'll send just a quick note, and he shoots back the answer, and that's the end of the conversation. However, if it needs, if we go back and forth and he has to explain to me how this is supposed to work and use this login here and this one over here, eventually I just pick up the phone and call him because, they go back to the old collaboration tool of the telephone because it's much easier just to talk back and forth versus trying to type out a very complex statement. So it kind of moves back and forth that way. And then if we're using, if I want to share a document with him and maintain that, then I'm actually going back to SharePoint and saying, here's the link to the SharePoint document that we're using as the correct version for what we're working on. For example, we're using test cases. Right. And wanted him to see my updates that I had put into it. So it really, it's interesting that, I have all these different tools and different methods of communication and collaboration. And I just have to, it's kind of like your mental checklist of picking out what you want to use and when you want to use it.
Well, I think that goes back to the theory that it's very personal. And so, a lot of organizations, and we, of course, have our own methodology, but I wonder if communication will be now part of what companies teach as process. That here, these are the things that are most effective. IM, email, collaboration site, and that will have to be how we do work, and it will have to be included in what gets us by and makes us as productive as possible. Because instead of having these interruptions into your workday, you can have it, as you just described, flow seamlessly.
I would agree with you, and I think it's to help with the adoption of a lot of these different platforms is, the training is probably much more key than we think about. That we think, oh, you know how to use your phone, and you know how to use instant messaging, and you know how to use, the browser. You're good to go. I don't really need to train you on that. But as you look at that collaboration stack that we looked at before, there's probably some training and some direction that needs to be provided whenever somebody joins the organization.
Yeah, that's funny too, because Christian Buckley brought up in the instant messaging session that etiquette is a big deal, and we key into etiquette of IM, and we know, okay, this is when you're supposed to interrupt someone, or this is how you're supposed to communicate, and don't be too casual, and don't spell out you. My daughter doesn't do that. That's just pet peeve. Anyway, but we only say don't type in caps for emails and spell things correctly, but we're not really talking about content where we do focus in on instant messaging. Speaking of instant messaging, we have a great question about e-discovery with social tools, IM, and different areas. And so this is a great question and not easy to answer because within different tool sets, it will be different. Most client-server-based applications for email actually are storing all of your emails in a database, and they can be accessed and searched through different methodologies. For Yammer, an interesting thing is you can always, as a Yammer administrator, download all of the content, and then, well, you could search for stuff, in Excel, or download it into a SharePoint database and be able to search it. Now, something that we've been doing a lot, which is really exciting, is either on-premise or in Office 365 specifically, e-discovery, I keep on mispronouncing, e-discovery is available out of the box because in Office 365, you're purchasing the latest and greatest versions of all of Microsoft's products. So you have the latest server that I mentioned before, and I think this is why it's important. You have server, I don't know what it is now, 2013, 2012 of Exchange. You have the link, which is the instant messenger. It does not, as of right now, go into Yammer. But you could figure out a way to work around that, and actually I have a funny feeling in the future that it will, with announcements that were made from the SharePoint conference this week. And then also it goes into your SharePoint site. So in one single location, e-discovery, you can type in a project, TNC, that Steve has been working on. You can see all of his emails, all of his IMs, all of his SharePoint sites of that information. I really like, too, we have something called the Microsoft Experience Center here, and how we show e-discovery, and I apologize, it's very Microsoft-centric, but is as a project tool. So I'm onboarding a new project manager, and I want them to learn about that TNC project. Now I can go to that e-discovery center. We have all of our information in Office 365. They type in TNC and they type in decisions or some keywords, and the search goes through all of those different areas and pulls in the information. So that was a really great question. Let me go into, I see one. So it was a question about Office 365 again, so I think I started talking about it. What happens with Office 365, and we have several different webinars on that subject, so I'll try to just be brief here, is, again, you get the latest and greatest version of everything instantaneously. So it's sort of a cross-breed of web and client, because at a certain level you also do get the Outlook client, so you can have that on your desktop and then at the same time have all the mobile access that you want. Interesting thing about apps, there are Microsoft apps out there that connect to news feeds and email, but only if you're Office 365, not if you have Exchange on-premise, if you have SharePoint on-premise. So we know where Microsoft is going in the future. Great questions. Keep them coming. All right, so key considerations. So we've had some great discussions here, so we might not have to spend as much time as we usually did, but they're sort of key items that we like to further the discussion and give you ideas to think about and bring back to your organization. So the first one is communication is not collaboration. I don't know if you've noticed it while I've been talking about this. I've been using communication when referring to email. And these blogs by a Gartner author, Anthony Bradley, really gave great insight to me. It's very fun because he asks, well, if we're going to build a Lego spaceship, and my 8-year-old would love that, could we do it easier over email or over a more specialized collaboration system? So here, communication is that, again, one-to-one and better understanding. But then collaboration is exchange and is active. And I think this is a really great way to look at a reason for changing how we use email and looking at it more as an information tool and a communication tool than as a collaboration tool. But as we saw before, we need to create that trust.
I think we've all seen that example of, you send a task, let's say, I'm gonna work on these 3 things today, and you send it as a communication item to your boss. But then if you, all of a sudden it turns into a 10-item list of tasks that you want to do, and 4 people have commented on each of the things, and they change the color, so this is their comment, it very quickly becomes not a very good collaboration form. It's very hard to track, what's being signed and who's working on what. So I very much agree with what you're saying in the statement here, and what Anthony Bradley said in the statement. Email is great for communication and those kind of bullet points, but once you start collaborating back and forth, it gets very messy very fast.
Right, and we go back to hopefully the visualization that you guys recognize as our current state is emails being used for everything. It's going to hurt to make a change. It really is. And hopefully you can look at that collaboration spectrum and get ideas of what are the alternatives to be able to put this collaboration into. So again, our goal here is to increase productivity. Yes, there's going to be a learning curve. Yes, you're going to have to commit yourself to presenting the reasons why. It's not really a question of how, but it's a question of why you'd want to do this. But once through that gate, you are going to create a much more rapidly responding organization. So the next key consideration we touched on a little bit, jokingly, is to the cloud. And here we'll ask our final poll, and that is, out of curiosity, when will you move to the cloud? And I think now I know how to share the results. All right, we'll wait 5 more seconds. Oh, there we go, share. All right, I learned something new today. So really interesting grouping of people that, a lot of us on the line are looking to move very rapidly. Please contact us if you need any assistance with that. Oh, sorry. But then, some people never. And I know there are some people from the government online, so I wonder if that's a key consideration. But it's a very interesting split. Or some people might have just bought the new version of their Lotus nodes for exchange, and of course, to capitalize that, you don't want to move. But this is very interesting results. Thank you all very much for sharing. I have another question, but let's just get through this slide, and then I'll go to answer this. So I think the key considerations for the cloud, are a lot of issues. I mentioned the government in the sense of where is our information. We worked with a company that wouldn't go to Office 365 because their information was going to be in the United States and not in Canada. And that was in the beginning of Office 365. Now they have different nodes in different countries that you can do that with, so it's really interesting. Of course, with some leaks in the NSA. People are saying who has access to my content, even if you say it's safe. Compliance. Some organizations for biopharmaceutical that we work with and other manufacturing industries just plain old couldn't allow it for a long time because of the questions of how to regulate the different services that were available in the cloud. Administration, do we want to have control, or is this something that we're okay with? And I'll use Microsoft as a great example. Are we okay with Microsoft being able to maintain this and have our best interest in mind? And I have to tell you that they're doing better and better every single month as we're seeing it. And actually, someone just chatted with me that I'm not showing my screen, so hold on. There we go. So thank you for your patience. There's the slide. And Steve, I think here it's interesting to talk about your IT background.
My IT background, yeah. I mean, I remember implementing Exchange 2000, Exchange 2003, going through the hassle of figuring out how many cows do I need to purchase, how many user cows, how many device cows, what's the absolute cheapest way that I can do this for. And we were probably a $100 million manufacturing organization with about 200 users or so. And it was a tough tough to figure that out. And then also a new version of Office came out, $300 per license. How do I justify that? Is there enough features to justify the upgrade? And then at the end of the day, it's just email, right? And 99% of people were attaching documents and sending out communication messages. As we're seeing now with Office 365, it's from that background, it's amazing. And I know that they've actually moved on and moved to Office 365 because the cost benefit is just there. That I don't have to be worrying about an Exchange server crashing in Mexico, or I don't have to worry about what's the capital cost that I have to plan in the budget for the next version of Exchange that's going to come out. So it really makes it compelling, and the fact that you also get a lot of those different versions of Office 365, you get the licensing for Microsoft Office. So you automatically get, you're not trying to make a persuasive argument to the CFO about how Office 2013 is better in some way, shape, or form, or easier to manage. You just already get it, and it's click to install, and it's easy to manage that way.
Yeah, I think that is a huge difference in how we approach systems today, as it's commoditized, and it goes along with what the expectations are. It used to be, oh, we can do this best for ourselves, and no one understands how we work. Yeah, we work, and the security precautions that we need. And now the evolution over the last 15 years is almost every industry is the same. And the high expectations of security compliance and all these different levels fit with the vast majority of people.
And it's a little bit easier to maintain, like from a security standpoint, like worrying about the next Exchange patch or the next, or the viruses back in the day that used to come out and infect people's Exchange servers. Like, you don't have to worry. You're not really responsible for that portion of it anymore. You kind of uploaded that to Microsoft to manage. It makes life a little bit easier for the network admin. I mean, there's still stuff you need to configure and set up in how you want to maintain the system, but it's at a little bit of a more of an abstract level than have to worry about, did I set the MX record? Did I, do some of those technical tasks to make sure that the Exchange backup occurred?
Right.
That those kind of things are being handled for you automatically is kind of nice. And I think also we're seeing with Office 365 all the different features that they're packing in there and giving you almost for free, like the Yammer that I think they introduced a couple of months ago. Some of the new things that they just mentioned at the SharePoint conference that are being available for Office 365 only, right, is making an even more compelling case.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there are workarounds, and maybe another thing that goes on here too is authentication. I think authentication continues to be something that you control, and that provides a lot of what we're talking about here, security and who you're allowing in and access and what have you. It's a great insight into that. So we're getting close to the end, and we wanted to talk about what does a cluttered inbox cost. So again, going back to that study, we have that those people interviewed said 22% of their time was spent on other activities besides just reading and writing emails. Why? Why are we doing that? And I think this study continues that if we can reduce this by half, you're talking about 2 weeks of savings, about 80 hours of savings per person, that if you can reduce this time to 10%. And I would say that you can do that by identifying the key areas where information is better stored, or I should say collaboration is better stored, and you can reduce your cluttered inbox. You're able to be more productive while not using email. And yes, it's because some of these systems are now mobile and now accessible anywhere, and because other people are using them similar ways to the ways that they're designed, because kids are using them and we're familiar with Twitter and Facebook. And please, if you're going to hire a consultant, they might not respond well if you say you want Facebook for your company. Now, yes, you do because you love the context of what Facebook provides, but unfortunately, it's not replicatable in your organization because you have to decide the information architecture. You have to decide on how you as an organization and a group of individuals want to set up your collaboration structure. And there's a lot of opportunity to more effectively use email. Any other thoughts, Steve?
Kind of along the same lines of using the right tool for the job. You know, we do a good job here at Portal Solutions. You know, we have an intranet that manages, you know, some of that publishing content where we want to have, you know, the official template or statements of work or engagement letters. I'm not searching through my inbox looking for what was the last one I sent so I can modify it or change it a little bit. I have the official template. It's out there. There's some context around how I'm supposed to use it. You know, collaboration. I'm using extranets and team sites to manage stuff that I'm managing with my team. And I'm just trying more and more to not use my my inbox as a record center for all the official documents. They should go in a specific place. Signed contracts are in a a SharePoint record center. So it's just a matter of, like I said, using the right tool for the job that I'm using.
Great, and also talking about the right tool for the right time. Someone just asked a great question. How do I recommend getting collaboration out of email with people who are outside your company? So, you know, it depends exactly on what your setup is, but I think that is an opportunity for those news feeds and microblogs that you can set up sites that allow external people into them. And what's great about that too, especially if you're a consulting company like us, is that, you know, there can't be a conversation that's in a complete vacuum, that everyone on the team can see it. Also, you know, that's part of the definition of an extranet, and yes, you're probably shaking your head a little bit and saying, well, but it's not the one-to-one personal connection, and I have to agree with that. But you can centralize the files so you're not emailing different versions. You can centralize task lists. You could use a discussion board if the news feed functionality isn't built into that team site, where again you can have these broader team-based conversations in them, and that all could be outside of your organization. We have to admit here, this is another interesting reason of going to the cloud, because most cloud providers, Google or Microsoft and Office 365, allows you to extend your environment to external users. That could be a good or a bad thing. But you certainly are capable of doing that. So it's a really great question. And sometimes you just can't do that. But you can definitely work with your IT organization to, again, look at how you authenticate into those systems and making them as accessible as possible from external users.
I think the other thing that we also tend to forget with email is that email is sent unencrypted. So it's really not necessarily a secure method of sending content back and forth, even though we tend to think about it like, oh, it goes from, like Adam was saying, it goes from my Outlook inbox to another person's Outlook inbox. Well, no, it actually goes over the internet and is unencrypted, and theoretically people can take a look at it. So that's another argument for saying, hey, I want to put this in a SharePoint platform that is secured and a person has to log into it and it's encrypted with SSL for any content traveling over the internet. So I think there's another reason why email may not be the best best solution for some of these collaboration things.
That's a really great point, and there are a lot of different ways to approach it and to control it all at the same time. So in the last few minutes, let's go over some different items that you can apply today. So things as direct as this sounds to unclutter your inbox. If you don't need it, delete it. If you instantaneously respond to items, now I'm not saying jump every time that Office or whatever operating system you're using reminds you that you have an email. Not saying that, but when you take your time to look at email, if you've responded and don't need it as a record, delete it. Clear your inbox. If you do need it, especially in Outlook, and if you have SharePoint, right-click, save as directly to a collaboration environment. Save it in a general place. If you have news feeds, highlight it in a news feed and tell why it's important. So later, you'll be able to go back and find that document and delete it out of your email. Your IT personnel will love you for reducing the structure and the requirements of supporting email.
I think most collaboration and document management systems usually have some sort of plug-in to like Outlook where it's easy to drag and drop and just say, take this record that I have, the signed contract, and throw it over here. And
you're right.
To the record center.
Harmon.ie for Lotus Notes and SharePoint and different systems. That is a really good point. I think Google itself, you can just put it right into the Google Drive. Small tricks as a IT organization and an individual, just start telling people you're reducing the size of email storage. Change the behavior. You can't store it here anymore. Now some people might put it on their C drive, so yeah, there are different ways you have to think about this, but we've seen that as a great motivator for people to snap out of the continued use of email as is and say, okay, what can I do to continue the control that I want to feel, but make it better. And then finally, I think a really good point is realign your use of email. I think on both a personal and organizational level, you need to decide how you want to use email, and that's not the biggest step. You need to tell everybody about it. Again, very personally, my wife didn't understand why I didn't respond thanks, and I had to explain that I think that that's a really useless email, and I don't appreciate getting it when someone says thanks. Yes, believe it or not. It should be understood that you're appreciative, and it reduces the time that I need to look through my email. So yeah, that was a little discussion, but it was setting the scale of how I wanted to use email. In the last minutes, I want to share that we do have a social analysis workshop where myself or some of our other social experts can come down to your office or locally. Maybe even do it on the phone, but it's a little bit harder, but we can try to work something out with you. And that is, a free workshop. You could email me about that, or again, go to the Twitter feed. And then also we have, upcoming webinars for the slippery slope of SharePoint migrations, which is now because there are different roadmaps of how SharePoint 2013 will exist at least for another 2 years, and another on-premise version. It's time for people to move, upgrade. Again, I mentioned the newsfeed and microblogs and the team sites that we'll be discussing, so I hope you'll join us there. If you didn't get a chance to share your question now, please feel free to email me, and I will respond or write up on a a blog. Oh, is there one? There is a new question too. So thank you all. If you want to stay, I'm going to answer one more question here. Quick is the newsfeed about SharePoint. It's not only about SharePoint. It will be about all tools. It will be about Yammer, SharePoint integration, Chatter, all of the different ones available. While, yes, we focus on SharePoint, we do work with customers to deploy a lot of different solutions, whatever is right for them. Same general question. It's not only about, all of them are not SharePoint specific. We do talk a lot about SharePoint, but Jive, Yammer as a team site or a group, and other tools that exist. So it's for all different tool sets. And if you have specific questions, please email me. We'll maybe create a new webinar to answer those questions, or I can reach out directly. Another question here is, how do you view cloud storage for email? Good, bad? And do we say goodbye to PSTs? So actually, that is a Microsoft question. And Microsoft has been trying to get rid of PSTs forever. And all of the Exchange admins have been recoiling at the idea. And now there is a new feature in SharePoint Online called the site mailbox. And in that site mailbox, it really is the replacement of a PST. It is in Exchange, but it's in the context of your team site in SharePoint. So it's a really neat combination. You also can view it through Outlook. So if you want more information about that, just let me know. Also, at the conference, they talked about OneDrive for Business, that you can separate that out now from the rest of the Office 365 offering. I would argue that as a technology, it's a really great idea, but I'm not sure I really want people storing that much email. I want to be able to control the knowledge as much as possible, and I think that's what these other systems do. So we've run over time. I see people escaping as quickly as possible, so thank you very much for the questions. Keep them coming. And we'll answer